Burning at the stake, the flame that feared. Dissent, you stand before a laughing crowd, wrists behind your back tied, ankles bound to a wooden stake. Smells of pitch and dried wood assault your senses. You smell the smoke before you feel the warmth, and you know this is where your story ends. Burning at the stake. The words themselves are medieval-sounding, a brutal-sounding word, and they were. But it was more than that, though. It wasn't merely a punishment. It wasn't just a demonstration. It wasn't just a display of strength. It didn't burn to kill, though. It burned to warn. So why did they use fire? Fire in medieval fantasy times symbolized cleansing. To burn a man alive was not merely to kill him. It was to purify his soul of sin, to provide him with one last hope of salvation in the form of unendurable suffering. Corrupt, maybe, but sacred in church and state eyes. One of the first on record was in 1022 in Orléans, France. Group of suspected heretics, basically outside-the-box thinkers, were condemned to death by fire, and that term, heresy, would ring across centuries as thousands were labeled not for violent crimes, but against religion. The Inquisition showed this fear to be real. In the 12th century, the Catholic Church began a campaign against heresy in Europe. Heretics accused of being one were questioned and tortured, and when they would not confess, or confessed upon torture, their souls were turned over to secular powers. The Church, naturally, did not spill blood, but the state, they struck the match. Take the case of Jan Hus. Hus was called to stand trial for his denunciations of corruption within the Church at the Council of Constance in 1415. He was assured safe conduct. He appeared, testified, and was immediately arrested. His doctrines against indulgences and papal power were condemned as heresy. He was burned at the stake, refusing to recant. His own martyrdom at the stake infuriated Bohemia and sparked rebellion, and his last words predicted a coming storm. In 100 years, God will raise up a man whose calls for reform cannot be suppressed. And who was he? Martin Luther, who would light the Protestant Reformation, a fire a century hence, or Joan of Arc. She was only 19 years old when she led armies and altered the course of the 100 Years' War. But her visions, her audacity, and her defiance of patriarchal gender norms threatened her. She was captured, handed over to the English, and put on trial in a church court in England. On what charges? Witchcraft and heresy. And punishment, burned at the stake in Rouen, 1431. And within barely a third of a generation she was retried, found not guilty on all counts, and canonized as a martyr. Today she's a saint. These were not isolated accidents. They were symptoms of deeper fear, fears of anything too new, autonomous, and innovative thinking from the traditional notions. When such fears are deep-rooted in robust ones, they start to imbue cruelty in their actions. It was witch hunt times, 16th and 17th centuries. Thousands were killed on charges of suspected witchcraft in Europe, mainly Germany and Scotland. Evidence: a peculiar birthmark, a herbal remedy, a complaint by a neighbor. Women, and more often poorer, widowed, or merely outspoken ones, were most vulnerable. Burning was an appropriate punishment. Witches were friends of the devil, and the devil, of course, abhorred fire. Approximately 50,000 people were killed for witchcraft in early modern Europe. They were not all burned. Some were hanged, others drowned or tortured. But fire was a symbol, not only of death, but of power. And here is the most terrifying fact of all. Burning at the stake wasn't about the victim. It was all about the crowd. These were public executions, done in town squares and marketplaces, where hundreds, sometimes thousands, showed up. Children were dragged by their parents. Food was sold by vendors. It was, literally, a hot ticket. But what does that say about society? That fear, masquerading as righteousness, was appealing. That watching someone get hurt could be considered not only acceptable, but obligatory. Slowly, the fires declined. In the late 18th century, when Enlightenment ideology cut more widely, public execution became rarer, and burning as a form of execution was performed to an extremely large degree. France legally replaced burning with the guillotine in 1790, a still barbarous but less symbolic and less theatrical device. Nowadays, burning at the stake is etched in our memories as one of the most horrific punishments ever devised, a punishment not for what individuals had done, but for who they were, what they believed, or what they represented. And that is where history has a stake in the period. Because while we no longer burn human beings at the stake, we continue to end up with societies punishing dissent, stifling voices, and scapegoating the other. The fire still burns, though, maybe now in a different way. It may be public shaming, political imprisonment, or virtual exile, but the same fear motivates it. So the question we need to be asking ourselves is the following: to whom are we binding to the proverbial stake in today's world, and why? Undefined. Let's keep that conversation going.